Right, good afternoon everyone. I'm David Daly. I'm a software development manager at Atos Worldline. And the guys working for me write the software which makes sure that what is shown on these things, displays at train stations, is accurate, up to date, and helps passengers to manage their journeys. It's in use at over 1,600 UK railway stations, and that includes the vast majority of the Network Rail managed stations, which tend to be the larger places like Manchester Piccadilly, Birmingham New Street, and London Bridge and Charing Cross just down the road from here. I occasionally write for the Atos blog, so if you're interested in software or project management or IT, I would encourage you to go and have a read of what we say on there, and also you can leave comments if you're inclined. That's my Twitter ID if you want to do some tweeting during this session, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. So to give me some idea, can you put your hands up if you are already using Kanban with your teams? Okay, that's quite a tough audience. Can you put your hands up if you're either already using Kanban or thinking about using Kanban with your teams? So just one person to try and persuade.
I'm just an engineer, I don't get a choice.
Ah, okay. We'll have to have a chat later about how you might have more of a choice than you think. Okay, so I'm going to talk through how my team adopted Kanban. I'll talk through some of the reasons why, some of the challenges we faced, and also how we overcame some of those challenges. But before I do that, I want to show you two things, and the first may initially appear to have nothing at all to do with the management of software development. So hands up if you recognise this character. Okay, and leave your hand up if you don't have children. Always surprises me how many stay up. So I've got a little clip of Peppa Pig's to play it.
What's that sound?
Is it a car alarm?
Is it a fire engine? No, it's baby Alexander.
Hello, everyone!
Hello,
Hello, Auntie Pig!
you remember baby Alexander, don't you, Peppa?
Are you staying for a few days?
No, this is what Alexander needs for just one day.
Can't go anywhere without all these baby things. Oh,
Hello, baby Alexander. He can't talk, Peppa. If he can't talk, then how do you know what he wants?
we guess. I'm guessing he's hungry.
Peppa, would you like to help feed Alexander? Yes, please.
So the bit I'd like to remember is what Peppa says at the end, which is, if he can't talk, then how do you know what he wants? And Uncle Pig says, we guess. And, well, certainly for me as a parent, that is a familiar experience. The other thing I wanted to share with you is various expressions of dissatisfaction that I've come across in the time that I've worked in IT. So starting with the sort of things that business managers say. Why are projects showing us green, 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 and then only turning red at the end? Why do people have an attitude of, well, I did my bit? Can't we all just work together to deliver to the customer? We need to be a technology leader. Why does it take so long to deliver anything at all? We need to deliver on our commitments. We can't get more resources. We need to work more efficiently and do more with the resources we have. So then things project managers say, I need more resources working on my project. And sometimes if they're lucky enough to have that wish granted, their next question is, why are all these people booking time to my project? This project has been sold unrealistically, by which they usually mean with an unrealistic expectation of timescales or costs. Developers always want to learn new technologies and techniques. Fine, but not on my project. Let's get my project delivered, and then you can think about learning new skills. We have too few people available with a particular skill set. Developers pick fun things to work on rather than what I need delivering. I can't be confident that a developer will deliver by the date they say they will. And developers are bad at estimating. And then last of all, we'll look at what developers say. Managers listen to our improvement suggestions, but very little ever changes. I keep getting given the same type of thing to work on, so I'm only being used for my specific niche skill set. I don't know what the priority is, so I'll just pick whatever's easiest, most fun, or what I last got nagged about. There's no time for learning new techniques and technologies. I have too much on. There's never time to improve the way we work. I get nagged for progress updates all the time. Heroics are recognised more than solid delivery. And the reason that I share all of this doom and gloom with you is not to depress you, believe it or not. It is to make the bold claim that Kanban really helps with all of it. And hopefully, by the end of this session, or the end of today, you will agree. So before you start working on software for a customer, what are the first two questions they will always ask?
How much and when?
Exactly. Oh, how much will it cost? And then, as soon as you answer that question, with the next breath, when will it be ready? And it's the second question that my team was struggling to give reliable answers to. And that's why, towards the end of 2013, we thought about trying to adopt a Kanban approach. So we began with a blank whiteboard, and this may now look familiar to you. We divided it up into columns, and we have one column for each stage in the process that a software change has to go through. So in our case, it starts with a ready column, which is anything that's ready to be started. A next column, which is the items that are prioritised for working on next. A code and test column for changes that are currently being worked on by a developer. A review column for changes that are being code reviewed. Merged into dev, which basically means that change is complete and can be built into a release. Regression test and fix, which is where that release is regression tested and any issues are fixed. Awaiting release means that release is now ready to go into production. Release scheduled, which means that release, we now have the date that that release is going to be put live onto a production server. And finally, at the end, released, when the change has actually gone into production. And then we take a Post-it note for each change. We write a description of the change on the Post-it note, and we put the Post-it notes in the columns that represent the current status of that change. And what we like to see is Post-it notes moving from left to right across the board. And the other thing we added was WIP limits, work in progress limits. So at the top of columns of the board saying what the maximum number of Post-it notes is that we're going to allow to be in that column at any one time. So the 8 there means we will have a maximum of 8 changes scheduled for release at any one time. The 4 there means that we will have a maximum of 4 Post-it notes in the code and test and review columns. And as soon as we did that, we got some benefits straight away. People liked the visibility. So people on the support team who were doing the releases liked the visibility of changes that were coming up. Developers liked to see when their changes were going into production. It immediately prompted a behaviour of finishing work that we'd already started rather than starting new work. So for example, if I'm a developer and I've been working on that change, when I finish coding and testing it, I would ask someone to review it and move the Post-it along to the review column. But because of that work in progress limit, I'm prevented from taking an item from the next queue. So that makes me think, well, could I review that so that it can be merged into dev? Or can I help the people who are working on those changes to help speed those through the process? It greatly improved our conversations around the work. So something that genuinely used to happen was a conversation would take place between a developer and a project manager. The project manager innocently would walk up to a developer and say, when will this change you're working on be ready? And the developer would say, by Friday. But in the developer's head, the question he's answered is, when will I have finished coding and testing it and sent it to someone for review? Nod from the developer in the room. What the project manager is delighted to hear is, great, it'll be released on Friday. And then the project manager rushes off to the customer. And most project managers actually would say, well, I'll be safe. I won't tell next Friday, I'll say it'll be on Monday. It's a whole extra day. But in practice, it was never going to go through all those other steps in a day, and so the customer would end up being disappointed. So that all looks very theoretical because it's a PowerPoint slide. If I switch briefly to a photo of our actual board, you see it's a bit messier, but it's broadly the same. We do have swim lanes for different sizes of work item, and we have different Postit note colours for types of work. So green for support work and yellow for project work. And we also use pink sticky notes to indicate items that are blocked for some reason, so we can see which may not be moving. If I switch back to the theoretical world, does anyone want to have a guess, apart from the experts in the room, Mike, at what is represented by the Postit notes in that area? Yeah, exactly. Who was that? Yeah, fantastic. So that's the total work in progress of the system. And for us, very specifically, those are changes that we have started working on. So we've spent money, but we are not yet able to invoice our customers for. So there's a very valid, in other words, reducing our work in progress in terms of software changes also reduces our financial work in progress. Coming back to the question then of how we could make more reliable commitments to our customers about when things would be done, what we do is measure the cycle time, which for us is the time it takes a change to move from next through to released. And then we use that measurement of past performance to help us predict future performance. But what we don't do is use the average, because if we used the average, then with a normal distribution, 50% of the time, you'd be disappointing your customers. Instead, we use the 80th or the 90th percentile. So if I show you how that looks, this is a graph showing the cycle time for small changes. And so what you can see is that by far and away the majority of changes are completed within 3 weeks. But the average is actually 5 weeks, the 80th percentile is 8 weeks, and the 90th percentile is 10 weeks. If I show you a similar graph for medium changes, it's a different distribution, but a similar story in that most changes are completed within 10 to 11 weeks. 10 weeks is the average, but the 80th percentile is 14 weeks, and the 90th percentile is 15 weeks. And once you have that data, we found it changes the style with which we make commitments to our customers. So I've got actual text from emails that we've sent to customers. Our target timescale for a change of this size is 10 weeks. However, 80% of these changes are delivered within 7 weeks. Therefore, I'd expect that it should be released to you by the 17th of March. This is another example. We are coding the change at the moment. Following this, the change needs to be tested, built into a release package, and a software release scheduled to your server. 90% of changes like this are released to customers within 8 weeks. And so what you find...
In your previous slide, it wasn't clear from that statement on the 17th of March was the target of the 80%.
That's fair. And we could potentially use clearer language. So 17th of March is actually taken from the 7 weeks, which I guess when you're receiving the email, you know what today's date is. But yes, you're right. You could have greater clarity around that, certainly.
You give them the 80%?
It actually depends in our case. It depends how much we think the customer is relying on that date. So if they're planning a big media announcement around the change, we might even go up to the 100th percentile or the 98th percentile.
Instead of the distribution curve.
Yes, but what we would normally take as reasonably good is 80th percentile performance. I think most customers, if they experience you meeting your deadlines 80% of the time, think you're doing quite well. That's my observation. And it does change the nature of the commitments you're making. So rather than saying, you will get this change on this date, what we're saying is there's a very good chance you will get this change on or before this date, but there is a low chance that it may be delayed, that you might get it after that date. And that opens up, I think, a much more mature conversation with your customers around what you can achieve.
Can I ask one more?
Yep, sure.
Sorry, do you look at special calls and eliminate those, or do you include your special calls
We don't eliminate any for the purposes of the metrics. What we do, and it's recent actually because of how long we've had it in operation, is we use the last 12 months of data for our commitments to customers. We look at the last 2 months separately to monitor trends, which you'll see in a minute. So at some point, some of your worst performers will fall out of the data set, and hopefully if you're improving, the numbers will get better. So for us, implementing a Kanban system really shone a spotlight on how we develop software. But my team does quite a lot of other things. We prepare estimates for the business development function. We write technical and functional specifications, and we implement configuration changes. So can anyone guess or speculate about what happened when we got this great clarity around how we develop software?
You were using it in a limited number of situations, and then you started to ask questions about using it in a more extended setting.
Exactly. We realised how much in the dark we were around all the other things we did. And so actually quite rapidly we ended up setting up a virtual Jira board to track software estimates and a new physical board to track functional and technical design and configuration changes. So this board has functional and technical design along the top and configuration changes along the bottom. That just shows both boards and where they're located in the office. So it kind of, because we realised how valuable it was to have the insight into our work, quite quickly we rolled out Kanban to more of our activities. It led to a new problem, which was if I need something to do, how do I decide which board I should go to choose what to work on next? And at first I thought this was very simple. I could just rely on this catchphrase. Has anyone heard of this? Stop starting and start finishing? Which is great. And I thought, brilliant, we'll just always go as close to the customer in terms of the value stream as possible. So start by trying to find a software change. If there's no software change to work on, find a tech spec. If there's no tech spec to work on, find a functional spec, and so on. But in my opinion, I was completely wrong, because what I came to realise was if you want work to flow through the system, that doesn't mean start finishing and stop starting. It means start work at the same rate that you're finishing it. And in our case, it had a very specific problem, which was that some people were not yet able to do technical and functional design. And so actually telling them to work on the software changes could lead you to a position where you finished all the software changes and now you had no technical designs complete for people to work on more software changes. So we introduced something that we called work profiles. It's quite simple, really. They're just an agreed policy with each individual on the team around how they will select work. So if I take Bob as an example, he will always choose a software change, but if there are no software changes to work on, he'll choose a tech spec. If there are no tech specs to work on, an estimate, then a config change, then a functional spec. Kate, slightly more sophisticated. She has a sort of round-robin approach for functional specifications and estimates. So if the last thing she worked on was a functional specification, then the next thing she would choose would be an estimate. If the last thing was an estimate, then she would choose a functional spec. If neither of those was available, then she'd choose a tech spec. If there's no tech specs available, a software change, and so on. And that, for us, seemed to improve the flow. But what was really nice about it was this wasn't a sort of imposed policy. It was agreed with each individual. No two people have the same policy. And it also means that if you want to look at growing certain skill sets, or if Bob comes to me and says, I'd like to do more estimation work, please, then rather than having some vague aspiration that let's develop him in that way at some time in the future, what you do is say, okay, well, how about we move estimates to the top with software changes, and you spend 50% of your time on software changes and 50% of your time on estimates. So it gives you quite an active way that you can develop skills within the team. There are three other things that I just want to touch on because I think they're very important aspects of Kanban, but they don't necessarily get the same attention because what people tend to gravitate towards is the visualization of the work on the Kanban board. So the first is having explicit management policies. How do people choose what to work on next? How are items expedited? Who makes the decision? How is that communicated to the team? I think part of the value in Kanban is that by trying to define that and write it down, you can then tweak it and see if changes in policy make an improvement to your process. The second is having definitions of done for each stage, which is just a set of prerequisites for a change to move from one column to the next. And the final is what I call data-driven retrospectives, but I think are they called service reviews now? Kind of monthly review had at the team level. And I think really the Agile community has had the concept of retrospectives for quite some time. I think what Kanban really brought to the table was this idea that they can be data-driven. So at our retrospectives, we look at customer satisfaction and score results. We look at project profitability. We get feedback from the support team. And we look at the data about the Kanban system. And coming back to what Andy was saying, this is quite interesting because in the past, we would probably have said, what happened with that nightmare change? Why did that take 18 weeks? Whereas actually, if you want to improve your 80th percentile performance, those are the changes you should be looking at, because improving that by 3 weeks won't make a difference to your 80th percentile performance, and it won't make a difference to what you can commit to your customer. Deliver those 1 or 2 weeks earlier, and you can actually commit shorter timescales to your customers, and you will get an improvement in your 80th percentile performance. We also look at trends, as I mentioned. So as an example, this is graphing the percentile performance for third line fault fixes. And this is graphing, it's quite hard to see actually, isn't it? The throughput for third line fixes. Now, does anyone want to have a guess at when we halved the number of developers working on third line fixes? It was late June. It's a lagging indicator, but you're right. It was actually for good reasons. We didn't have many faults coming through, and there was other urgent business work coming in. But what's really nice is to be able to demonstrate the impact that removing developers from a particular activity has. And conversely, if you add developers, it's nice to be able to demonstrate that you have actually improved productivity. What senior managers don't tend to like is the idea that they're throwing more resources at something, but they're not getting any results from it. And so once we've analysed or looked at all the data, we ask ourselves 3 pretty standard questions in our retrospectives. What went well? What could have been better? And what should we be doing differently? And then everyone on the team writes down their ideas for each area and sticks them up on the wall under each heading. And then we choose just one of the items for what we should be doing differently, and we commit to implementing that before the next retrospective, which is like having a work in progress limit on process change. And although it might sound a bit negative to say, well, we'll only choose one, our experience is that people found it quite frustrating to have a monthly meeting, come up with lots of ideas for what we could do better, and then have another monthly meeting and find that we haven't implemented any of those, but let's think of another 20 ideas for what we could do better. To give some real examples of things we have changed, a very simple one, we started dotting items that were awaiting release. So any post-it that is in the awaiting release column, every week we take a felt marker and put a dot on it. And we did that because we identified that some of those changes that were falling at the 80th percentile mark just seemed to have spent longer than others waiting to be released. What was interesting was that just dotting it every week so that people could see how long they'd waited actually had the effect of improving our delivery rate. So initially I said, let's dot them, and if we get more than 2 dots, we should have a release to the customer. And there was a bit of kickback saying, well, no, we shouldn't, no. So I said, okay, we'll just dot them. And actually that was enough. Once people knew, the team for themselves would go, that's been waiting for 3 weeks. Who's it for again? Oh, yeah. And they would schedule a release. We stopped doing large changes, so quite quickly people realised that large changes just sat in the same column forever, It wasn't good for tracking work. Developers didn't like working on these humongous changes that took them 6 months. So we scrapped them. We added a step to always phone and speak to the customer before we started working on a change to try and ensure that what we ended up delivering met the customer requirement. And we added, we started automating all our data migrations. So the developers working for me would spend quite a lot of their time, well, it wasn't a lot of time per release, but we were doing a lot of releases. And so developers would spend a lot of time doing data migrations to make releases to customers work. By automating those, they're now freed up to spend more time on fault fixes and new functionality. And then I kind of want to go through a practical example of how we choose what thing we're going to change during our meetings. How long have I got? Till 3:30? I think it is.
Yes.
So I think we can do this because it is quite quick. So I've written down some ideas for things we could do better, and they're all focused on improving the environment. So always switching lights off when we leave the room is one. Have shorter showers is the second. Drink fewer hot drinks is the third. And start cycling to work is the fourth. I'm going to try 2 ways of selecting the best one, or the one that we're going to implement. But to play this game, you have to genuinely be prepared as of tomorrow to start doing this thing. So if you don't own a bike and you live 100 miles away from work, you don't vote for cycle to work. So it's not just what you think would be the best thing, it's what you think would be best and you'd be prepared to start doing tomorrow morning. So we'll start by just having kind of a show of hands for this. So votes for always switching the lights off when we leave the room. That's quite a lot. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We'll say about 15. So votes for having shorter showers. 3, 4. Drinking fewer hot drinks. 3. And cycling to work. 2. And can I just check? Did anyone put your hand up if you voted for more than one? All right, okay. I didn't make it clear at the start that it was kind of each person gets 1 vote. So the alternative is dot voting, which will get you out of your chairs. Basically, each can take 3 dots, and you can stick a dot on whichever idea you think is best. But because you've got 3 votes, you can distribute them how you like. So you could put 1 vote on cycling to work and 2 on always switching the light off, or 3 votes for have shorter showers. It's your choice. And on your marks, get set, go. Take your dots and then pass it on. Yeah.
I was. What happens if you already do 3 or 4?
Sorry?
What happens if you already do 3 or 4?
Well, that's a good question then. It's your choice, really. You could vote for one that you already do, in the sense that you don't need to make any change then.
Right, yeah.
Or you might think the best. It's your choice. It's a bit of a contrived example, to be fair. The conclusion probably won't. They were very welcoming to it. So Kanban helped with that. I don't think they would have adopted it without.
Okay.
Brilliant, thank you everyone. I think give yourself a round of applause and then next door they'll think we've finished. Just a bit of management pressure. So the result is exactly the same. And I'm wary of asking this, but how many people didn't put any dots on always switching the light off? Okay, 4. So effectively what's happened there is when you have a majority vote and everyone gets 1 vote, more people end up having voted for another item, whereas with dot voting, more people have put at least 1 vote on there. Not by a massive difference in this collection. What you find in a real example is that typically the winner everyone has put at least one dot on. It also, I don't know if you've ever come across a scenario where a team proposes some solutions, and say I've proposed this solution and I think it's the best. It's a little bit demoralising for that person when no one votes for their solution and they can feel a bit unlistened to, a bit uncared for. Whereas dot voting makes them feel that yes, it was heard, yes, you thought cycling to work was a good idea, but actually the majority of people prefer that. And I think there's something as well about the physical action of sticking the dots on and being able to see, even from probably right across the other end of the room, which one is the winner, which makes this a very quick and easy way of choosing a result. So the point I'm getting to is it won't necessarily change the outcome, but it does change the level of buy-in you've got. And with process change, most of the time thinking of what to improve is the easy part. But without people buying into that change and without people implementing that change, you won't get any value from the process improvement. And so what that puts me in mind of is this wisdom from over 2,500 years ago. The best leaders are those their people hardly know exist. If you don't trust the people, they will become untrustworthy. The best leaders value their words and use them sparingly. When they have accomplished their task, the people say, amazing, we did it all by ourselves. And I think that's part of the power of Kanban, because if you give a team the data that lets them assess how well they're performing, and you give them the autonomy and the power to change the process, then not only will the process improve, but they will have done it for themselves. So, from one great philosopher to another, back to the words of Peppa Pig. If he can't talk, then how do you know what he wants? And Uncle Pig says, we guess. And for a long time, that's how software development felt to me. Lots of crying, lots of pain, but sometimes you're left guessing, trying to figure out what's going wrong. And Kanban lets your process talk to you. It shows you exactly what's going on. And then by giving people the power and autonomy to change the process during data-driven retrospectives, you can improve the process into the future. But I still think the best thing is it's easy to get started, because you begin with what you do now, you visualize the process, and then you commit to continuously improve it, to reduce the cycle time and to increase the predictability with which you can deliver valuable software to your customers. Thank you.